Joining us now is Tim Twentyman, senior writer for DetroitLions.com. And Tim, thanks for joining us. The draft is Thursday. Who do you like for the Lions in that first round? I know a lot of people have them going D-line.
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me again. This has become an annual tradition here with us, and I always enjoy it. Look, I think the Lions are sitting at a great spot. Obviously this is a really strong defensive line class. It's probably one of the stronger defensive line classes in maybe a decade. So, there's a lot of thought that at the end of the first round there, you're going to still be able to get an edge rush or a defensive tackle who can come in, be part of that rotation and help right away. But it's also really good interior offensive line class. And if you look at Detroit, just what they have remaining with Kevin Zeitler moving on to free agency, obviously return Graham Glasgow. But I think if you were to ask Graham, he's coming off a season that probably wasn't up to his standards. And then you've got a second year guy in Christian Mahogany who got a handful of starts, looked good in those. But I could really see them, wanting to boost the interior offensive line and that competition there. This has been a football team, Jack, that's been based on that offensive line being their strength, right? And so if you get great value at the end of the first round, you're sitting there at 28, and maybe a guy like Gray Zabel, who I put in my mock draft, the versatile offensive lineman from North Dakota State, started at left tackle, left guard in college. He's played center at the Senior Bowl, was the best center there. So there's a guy that you can plug and play, right? You've got those roster limits on game day. You usually only keep 8 offensive linemen. So you get an offensive lineman, one of the best offensive linemen in this draft, I think it helps you right away.
Are there some names you're looking at for the Lions in rounds 2, 3, 4, guys that might be the value picks in this draft for them?
Yeah, name wise, it's tough because you really don't know who's going to be there. Josiah Stewart, maybe a local name from Michigan. He came in here, did local day. I could see some guys like Donovan Izruka, the edge rusher from Boston College, if he slips into the second round. And then position wise, there's some wide receivers and some safeties that you look at this team, and you say, well, do they really need that? You return your top 4 wide receivers, but long term, I think you don't have anyone signed except for Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams past next year. So that could be a need. And then safety. You've got arguably 2 of the best, but if a guy like, Malachi Starks or Xavier Watts is there at safety, you can boost that spot, boost your depth there. They can learn from 2 guys, and then you've helped those numbers. Maybe at safety, like Omeka Egbuka from Ohio State, Luther Burden, if he slips down into the second round. I think really in the second round, it's going to become best available, but there's some positions there at safety, wide receiver. If you don't get a defensive lineman in the first round, that's a great spot for one of those guys too. Maybe a defensive tackle like a Derek Harmon, Tyleek Williams, Kenneth Grant from Michigan. Those guys all fit, I think, second and third rounds if they get there.
Brad Holmes has a history of trading up in that
Yeah.
first round. He's done it a couple times. Is there somebody that you would see, like, say at 20, that guy's still there? Is there somebody that would prompt him to make a move? Would you be surprised if he made a move?
I would not be surprised. It's funny. I had Brian Hegspeth, the college director of college scouting, on my podcast last week, and he said one of the effects of NIL is that 50 to 70 underclassmen typically now stay in college. And so it makes the depth of that draft a little bit less. A lot of those guys are your, late first, second, third rounds. And so I think because of that, we see teams move up. I think drafts aren't as deep on the back end as they used to be. And so I wouldn't be surprised at all. One name, Jack, I really love this guy in the draft. It's Jahad Campbell, the linebacker from Alabama. I think if he's sitting around in my mock draft, I had him being off the board, but Detroit. But there's a guy, had over 100 tackles. I think he had 6.5 sacks, which led Alabama, led them in tackles for loss, can play the will, Mike, and the Sam, can play all 3 spots. Lions value that kind of versatility in their defense. And he's one of my favorite players in the entire draft. I think he can play 3 different spots, helps you on the edge, character guy. If he's still kind of around there, I think he really fits what this team's all about, and the production fits. And if he's kind of there, I could see maybe that being a guy they move up for.
Brad Holmes has been so good in this draft that it's kind of creating a problem now. Because he's got guys he's got to sign. He's got guys he's got to make decisions whether to keep or not. Who are some guys that you think are must-sign guys that are on this roster now whose contract years are starting to get close?
Yeah, it's a good problem to have, right, Jack?
Yeah.
You've drafted 7 Pro Bowl or All Pro players in the 4 years they've been here. I mean, it's been amazing. But like you said, those come due, and Brian Branch is going to be coming due. This year alone, Kirby Joseph's on last year his deal led the league in interceptions. I think he just fits what this team is all about. He doesn't mind coming up and being physical too. I think they get a deal with him done. Aiden Hutchinson, I think they get a deal done with him this offseason. And then you've got to start to make some decisions because Sam Laporte is going to come due, Brian Branch is going to come due, Jamison Williams is going to come due, and I just don't think you can sign all those. To me, of that group, I think you got to have Branch, and he's the number one of those kind of 3 guys that are going to be coming into the last year. I think he's just so dynamic, can do so much things for your defense. Sam Laporta, the way that tight end, if you can get an elite one, it's just, you're right. Where does that leave you now with Jamison Williams? You're going to pick up his 5th-year option, so you control him for 2 years, but after that, can you really legitimately sign him? So there's going to be some tough decisions, but again, that's good decisions to have. You have too many young players that are really, really good that you can't re-sign. I mean, 31 other general managers in the league would love to have this problem, right?
Absolutely. Now, will Aiden Hutchinson's injury, will that have any impact on what he gets from the Lions? Because he's a guy they cannot let go.
No, if we were talking about an Achilles, if we were talking about some kind of ligament damage and nerve damage, something like that, he broke a bone, and so bones heal. Usually stronger than they were. I talked to Brad Holmes at the owners meetings in Florida last week. He said they love all the where he's at in terms of his rehab. Some of the little metrics that they measure along the way, he's ahead of where he should be. So they're real positive that he's going to come back, be the full impact player, and I don't think that will affect his re-signing numbers at all. I think he's going to probably be right up there with Myles Garrett, in some of that generational money, and that's what Brad talked about when he's like, I've got to start putting some money aside for these Bills because Aiden's is going to be certainly a big one.
Lions in the Hall of Fame game against Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers. What does that say about what the NFL thinks of this team and this franchise right now?
Well, they're a popular draw. I mean, they were number one on ABC last year. They had the number one game on Amazon. They had the number one game on ESPN. I think they were the number 2 game behind one Dallas game on Fox. I mean, they are a draw. I would expect when the schedule comes out, they're going to have the max number of primetime games. They're a huge draw, and Ford Field has become kind of a must-see place to see a game. There are over 20,000 season ticket holders on the wait list now. It's become one of those places that's one of the hardest in the NFL to watch, and there's so many young dynamic players that when they're on national TV, they're a huge draw. And so all of a sudden, Jack, it's kind of crazy around here. We've become one of the most watched, one of the most popular teams in America, and it's fun to be a part of.
Yeah, nobody's complaining about the Lions playing on Thanksgiving Day anymore. Uh, but I do have to, this schedule, especially the road schedule.
Yeah.
I mean, how dangerous is that for this team? I mean, the steps they've taken toward, becoming a Super Bowl contender. Is this one of those things? Do they have what it takes to still be like that top team or top 2 or 3 teams in the NFC with this kind of a schedule?
Yeah, it's a brutal schedule. I mean, you look at it, having to go to some of the teams in the NFC North, the Baltimore, and then you got the NFC East having to go to Philadelphia, and it just it goes on and on and on. But I mean, I guess you can look at it 2 ways. I think they could be a better football team this year, especially if they don't suffer all the injuries that they did last year. They could be a better football team overall and have fewer wins, have more losses. I think that's possible because of the schedule and the road schedule that you talked about. But you could look at it this way too, iron sharpens iron, right? I mean, the whole goal is you to be playing your best football leading into December, January, in time for playoffs. Well, this schedule is going to force them to do that, whether they like it or not. They're going to have some tough games down the stretch. Some tough playoff environment, atmosphere type games, and I think that you can look at it like it's a negative, like boy, you wish you have an easy schedule, or this is going to keep them sharp and ready for the playoffs. We saw the disappointment in the playoffs last year as the number one seed. You had the bye, and they came out a little flat, especially on defense. So, maybe you have that wild card game this year. It makes you stay sharp, and you're better off for it. So you could look at it at both ways, but it certainly is not going to be easy, especially with the road schedule that they have. It is playoff team after playoff team on the road.
Tim, you've been doing this a while, and Detroit just knocked out the draft when they hosted it last year. So Green Bay's got its work cut out for them here. But can you believe how big the NFL draft has become?
No, it surprised me. I mean, there's nothing played. There's no ball being thrown around. It's names being called on a stage, right? I mean, it has nothing to do with football whatsoever, and it's popular. But it's that newness to it, right, Jack? It's like when free agency starts. You love the possibility of those kind of new pieces, those new toys on your roster, those new names, and what they could potentially mean for you. And so free agency has become so huge because of that. And I think the draft too. You know these guys so well from college, the pre-draft process and all the mock drafts and everything that leads up to it. You feel like you know these guys, and every football team feels like they're going to be a better football team come Saturday evening, and that's the exciting part about it. And if you can get some young guys that can help you right away, Detroit's certainly proven that they've been able to do that over the last 4 years with Brad Holmes. That's the excitement surrounding it. But I never thought we'd have 1 million people in downtown Detroit for a draft weekend when I first started doing this. But the NFL, man, it's 24/7, 365 days a year.
Last thing for you, Tim. The Lions lost two coordinators who became head coaches. How big of an impact is this going to have? Will these Lions look the same next year as they did last year, or will
Yeah,
this change dramatically?
I don't think it'll change really dramatically. I don't think your viewers watching a game on Sunday is really going to see a huge difference. When you look at John Morton, the offensive coordinator, he was here and he was on staff in 2022 when they kind of built this thing with Ben Johnson. He's been in this league a long time. He was kind of the brainchild of some of the motions and different sets, and he worked in that room with Jared Goff, so there's a lot of familiarity there. So I think they're in a good spot there. And then Kelvin Shepard, the defensive coordinator, he's been the linebacker coach for the last 4 years under this regime, and they've really been grooming him. Aaron Glenn was the last 2 years in particular to take over this role. Calvin would actually go back and watch a game and make all the defensive calls and judge how close he was to Aaron Glenn, just making all those calls and preparing himself to be a play caller. And so this has been a couple years in the works. He's very familiar with what Aaron did. The difference was Aaron worked the secondary in. I think Calvin's going to be the front seven back, so that might be a little bit of difference. You see it just in terms of level of importance and kind of what the scheme focuses on. But these two guys that have been here before are very familiar with Dan Campbell, are very familiar with these players, so I don't think it'll look much different.
We always get great information when we talk to Tim Twentyman. Tim, thanks. Enjoy the draft. And it'd be really interesting to see how the Lions follow up what they did last year. I can't wait.
Yeah, it'll be a couple long days Thursday and Friday, but hang in there. You'll get your pick, and we should get some young talent that's going to help this football team in 2025.